In April 1925, five of the biggest scrap metal dealers in France opened the same letter. Government letterhead, Ministère des Postes et Télégraphes. A meeting, discreet, at the Hôtel de Crillon on the Place de la Concorde. State business. Please do not discuss this with anyone. The man who signed it had the stationery printed the week before. His name was Victor Lustig. Probably. We'll come back to that. And what he was about to sell those five men was the Eiffel Tower. 7,300 tons of iron standing on the Champ de Mars, owned by the city of Paris. Theft never entered into it. Over about 3 weeks, he built something cheaper and far more useful than a crime. The appearance of a legitimate government contract, the letterhead, the suite, the manners, the little apologies for the secrecy. One of those five men wrote him a check and went home and never told anybody. Not the police, not the newspapers. Not for the rest of his life. Getting the check was the straightforward half. Getting the silence took the rest of the operation. Start with why anyone believed it. Because in 1925, the Eiffel Tower was not an absurd thing to sell. Gustave Eiffel had died 2 years earlier, in 1923. His tower was 36 years old, and it was, in the most literal engineering sense, a problem. The structure is puddle iron rusts. To stop it rusting, you repaint the whole thing every 7 years or so, and one coat takes about 60 tons of paint, applied by men hanging off it on ropes in the wind. Paris newspapers ran pieces about what the upkeep was costing and whether the city should keep paying for it. Lustig read one of them in a hotel room. There was real history behind those articles. The tower was built to be temporary. Eiffel got a 20-year permit for the 1889 World's Fair, and on the 1st of January 1910, the whole thing was scheduled to come down. It stayed up for one reason. The French army had strung a radio aerial from the top and found it could reach forts 400 kilometers east. Then, by 1908, 6,000 kilometers. So the state extended the concession by 70 years, and Paris kept its landmark as a side effect of keeping its telegraph masts. Now look at the letterhead again. Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. Lustig didn't pick that ministry because it sounded impressive. He picked the one department in the French state that a scrap dealer would believe genuinely had authority over that tower. Because for 15 years, the tower had been a telegraph installation with a viewing platform attached. The truth had already gone soft in that exact spot. Lustig walked into the gap and stood there like he'd been assigned to it. The meeting was in a salon at the Crillon, one of the 4 or 5 best addresses in Paris, an 18th century palace on the Concorde, the kind of room that does most of your talking before you open your mouth. Lustig had taken a suite. He arrived by chauffeured car, and the first thing he did was apologize for the location. Government business, this sensitive, couldn't be handled in a ministry building, he explained, not with journalists sitting in the corridors. Then he told them the tower was coming down. Engineering faults, repair bills the city could no longer justify. Political complications he was not at liberty to describe. The government had decided to dismantle it and sell the iron, and the decision would not be made public until a contract had been signed, because Paris would lose its mind. Sealed bids, fast decision, total discretion. Then he took them to see it, a hired limousine across the river, and 5 men in good coats standing at the foot of 300 meters of rusting iron, doing arithmetic in their heads about rivets and rolling stock, and where on earth you would even put it. Nobody in that car asked to see a decree. You don't ask a senior civil servant for his paperwork. Asking is the thing that marks you as a man who doesn't belong in the room, and every one of them badly wanted to belong in that room. There's a list that circulates under Lustig's name. 10 rules for con men. Rule 1, be a patient listener. It's this, not fast talking, that gets a con man his coups. Rule 3, wait for the other man to reveal his politics, then agree with them. Rule 8, never boast, just let your importance be quietly obvious. Read it as a business manual instead of a curiosity, and the whole list describes a single activity, and that activity is listening until the other man tells you what he actually wants. In that salon, Lustig was listening for one man in particular, and it wasn't the richest one. He wanted the dealer who was after something the iron could never give him. He found André Poisson. Poisson was provincial. He had arrived in Paris with money and without standing, into a business world that ran on which school you attended and which family you married into and which rooms you'd been invited to since you were 20. He was the man at the edge of the group laughing half a beat late. His wife thought the whole arrangement smelled wrong and said so out loud. Poisson wanted it to be true more than he wanted it checked, because look at what was actually on the table for him. A government contract. The kind of thing that permanently ends the question of whether you are a serious man in this city. The dealer who takes down the Eiffel Tower is never the newcomer again. The iron was the smallest thing Poisson thought he was buying. And then Lustig made the move that separates a swindler from a professional, a move so backwards that once you see it, you understand exactly why no police report was ever filed. He asked Poisson for a bribe. He raised it as a confession. In a private meeting, he went quiet, got visibly uncomfortable, and admitted that a deputy director general at the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs is paid very badly for the responsibility he carries. Other men in his position had found ways to supplement. If Poisson could see his way to adding something on top, for him, personally, discreetly, the contract was Poisson's. Consider what that request proves. An honest official has nothing to sell you. A thief wants your money fast and clean and wants to be gone by morning. A man who asks for a kickback is telling you he holds real power and is willing to abuse it. And he is handing you permanent leverage over him, which no stranger would ever do unless the deal underneath were genuine. The demand for a bribe was the strongest credential in the entire operation. It cost Lustig nothing to produce, and it did more work than the letterhead, the suite, and the limousine combined. It also carried a second set of teeth. The moment Poisson handed over that extra money, he stopped being a buyer. He became a man who had bribed a government official. Poisson paid. How much, nobody can tell you. The figure quoted most often is 1.2 million francs. At 1925's rate of about 21 francs to the dollar, roughly $57,000, call it $1 million today, plus 70,000 francs on the side. Other accounts render the whole thing as $70,000 flat. The official history published by the Eiffel Tower's own operators says only that Poisson bought the tower's iron for an unknown sum. They conflict because there is no receipt, no charge sheet, no complaint, no case file, no court. The number is missing from history because the man who paid it made certain it never entered a record anywhere. Lustig and his partner were on a train out of France within hours. From Vienna, he bought the Paris papers every morning and went looking for his own face in them. Nothing came. Not that week, not that month, not ever. Run through Poisson's options on the morning he understood. He can walk into the préfecture. He can hand over a forged contract, describe a man whose real name he doesn't know, and explain that the money left the country days ago. Odds of recovery, essentially nil. And to file the complaint at all, he has to say the second part out loud, that he also paid a bribe to a public official in order to win the contract. He would say it to a police clerk, then to a lawyer, then it reaches the papers, and then every dealer in the trade, and then it goes home to his wife, who told him. The financial arithmetic says report it. The money's already gone. There's nothing left to lose. The social arithmetic says the money was the cheaper of the two losses, and it isn't close. There's no luck in any of this. Lustig chose a man whose deepest fear was looking like a fool in front of Paris, then arranged matters so that going to the police became the most reliable available way to become one. Shame isn't a side effect of this con, it's the collateral. Now, the part almost every version of this story gets wrong. You've heard that he sold the Eiffel Tower twice. It's in the headline of nearly every article ever written about him, the Smithsonian's included. He tried twice. About a month later, he was back in Paris, back at the Crillon, with fresh letters and a fresh set of names out of the scrap trade. Same suite, same tour, same confidential decree that unfortunately could not be shown to anybody. Somebody in the second group made a phone call. Which call exactly depends on the account you read. The ministry, the city, the police. But the outcome doesn't vary across any of them. The police were told, and Lustig went out of France and onto a boat for the United States without collecting a franc. One sale, one near miss, which is stranger than the legend because it means the con had a shelf life of roughly 4 weeks. It worked for exactly as long as one embarrassed man's silence held, and not a day longer. Underneath all of it sits a harder problem, and it deserves saying plainly. Almost everything you've just heard, the salon, the 5 dealers, the limousine, the bribe, Poisson himself, traces back to a single book, The Man Who Sold the Eiffel Tower, published in 1961 by James Johnson, a retired U.S. Secret Service agent who had worked the counterfeiting case that finally caught Lustig. 36 years after Paris, 14 years after Lustig was dead. There's no French police file, no trial transcript, no complaint from any dealer. By design, the entire function of the shame was to guarantee that none of those documents would ever exist. The best evidence the con happened is the exact shape of the hole where the evidence should be. Then there's the victim's name. In French, poisson means fish. The mark in the most famous confidence trick of the 20th century is called Mr. Fish. What is documented is what Lustig did afterwards, and it doesn't read like the resume of a man who needed a myth invented for him. He sold the Romanian money box, a cedar case fitted with brass dials and rollers that supposedly copied banknotes using radium. $10,000 a unit, and often a great deal more, mostly to wealthy passengers on transatlantic liners, who received a 6-hour waiting period and a piece of furniture. A Texas sheriff bought one, worked out the problem, and tracked Lustig all the way to Chicago. Lustig convinced him he'd simply been operating it wrong. He apologized for the confusion and handed him a thick stack of cash as compensation. The cash was counterfeit. The sheriff was arrested passing it in New Orleans. In the early 1930s, he went to Al Capone and asked for $50,000 to fund a scheme, promising to double it in 60 days. He put the money in a safe deposit box and did absolutely nothing with it. 2 months later, he came back, apologized for the failure of the venture, and returned all $50,000. Capone, who lived in a world where money did not come back, was so struck by the honesty that he counted out $5,000 and told Lustig to take care of himself. The $50,000 was the bait. The $5,000 was the whole con. Then he built the operation that finished him. From 1930, working with a chemist named Tom Shaw and a druggist named William Watts, Lustig ran counterfeit hundreds at something like 100,000 fake dollars a month for 5 years. The notes cleared bank tellers. The Secret Service had a name for the problem long before it had a name for the man. They took him on Broadway in May 1935. In his pocket was a key to a locker in the Times Square subway station holding $51,000 in fakes and the printing plates. The day before his trial, he tore his bed sheets into a rope, went out a third-floor window of the Federal Detention Headquarters in Lower Manhattan, a building the government advertised as escape-proof, and climbed down the front of it in daylight, pausing to wipe the windows on his way past. A man cleaning windows is a man nobody looks at twice. Pedestrians watched him do it. Not one of them called anybody. He was free for 27 days. Pittsburgh police picked him up. 20 years, Alcatraz. He spent them complaining. Prisoner 300 filed over 1,000 medical requests. On the 9th of March 1947, he caught pneumonia in the Federal Medical Center at Springfield, Missouri, and 2 days later, he was dead. In 2015, a historian named Thomas Andiel went looking for him in Hostinay, the Bohemian town Lustig always gave as his birthplace. Andiel went through everything that had survived: electoral rolls, parish books, records pulled back out of Nazi bonfires, the register of every child who attended the local primary school. Every child in that town is on that list. Victor Lustig is not. There is no record anywhere that he was ever born. There is a record of his death. A clerk in Springfield, Missouri filled out the certificate and reached the line marked occupation. He wrote, apprentice salesman.